Welcome back to Cards and Comics, guys. Today I want to talk about grading and how it's taken me a long time to realize that, for the most part, grading doesn't make your collection better. And in a lot of ways, grading takes away resources that could be utilized to grow a collection, to display a collection, to travel to shows, to hang out with people in the hobby, to have a good time. If the money that we're spending on most cards that are being graded was spent on that, I think our hobby would actually be a better place. We have gotten to the point with grading, almost full circle to what it was originally intended for, that it's just something that isn't needed anymore for a lot of cards. And I'll start with cards like 101s, things like that, right? Why are we getting those cards graded? All you're doing is giving PSA a lot of money to grade cards. They love to upcharge you. So the solutions or the situation is like this: a 101, you get it graded and it comes back 7, 8, or 9, and you don't make any more money if you would have just kept the card raw. If it comes back at 10, they're going to upcharge you, and so they're going to cut into your percentage of profit, and you might make more money on it. But again, it's a crapshoot. It's a gamble, right? And that's the thing, is like, they're hoping you gamble. They're hoping that you send cards in. And PSA has started to really reel in the TCG guys, the Pokemon guys, and really sports cards are on the back burner. So, in my opinion, based on videos like Chris Sewell's put a good video out there about how, unless you hit a 10 on modern cards and 90s cards, and I'm a huge 90s card guy, I see it every day. If you don't have a 10, it doesn't matter if it's a 7, 8, or 9. I did a video where I showed where PSA 5s for a lot of these sets, like Essential Credentials, the Man Refractors, 93 Finest, people just want the cards. They don't care if it's a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. As long as it's not bent in half or torn in half, people just want the card if it's that rare, if it's a cool card. So grading doesn't really matter. And I think, in terms of the number on the card, and that's really changed. Midlife Sports did a great video where he talked about in vintage cards, especially pre-war, where people are just going on eye appeal versus the number grade as much as far as what they're willing to pay. Again, at that point, does the number on the card really matter? And I think we're seeing it doesn't matter as much anymore. So why are we consistently, as a hobby, fooling ourselves into thinking that grading is what we need to do? Because, again, for my personal collection, I had about 60, 80 cards for PSA, and another 100 or so cards I was going to send to SGC this year. And I made the conscious decision just to go and put them in my, case, and display them and put in my collection like this, not get them graded. And I'm not someone who's a teetotaler, and I'm not going to say there's ever no need to grade. That's not true. And I'll give some examples where I think a grading really is important or still a part of the process. But in the past, if you have cards that are rare, cards like this, which this is the diamond version, people would just automatically assume you have to get cards like this graded because, that's how the hobby works. It's sophisticated. When at least 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was just how you did, how things worked. If you were buying cards, had cards that had any sort of real monetary value or were collectible, the only way to maximize your value and to sell these cards for what they're worth is to get them graded. And we're seeing that, again, these are cards I'm just now keeping in my collection. We're seeing that's not the case anymore. We're seeing that raw cards a lot of times are bringing good money. Even in 90s, it was always, the thought that, these kind of cards have to be graded to make any sort of money, right? Otherwise they're going to sell for a fraction, and that's just not what's happening. It's just not. People are willing to pay a lot of good money for the raw version of these cards, and you can just do your own research. You can look things up, but I'm telling you the truth is that, in a lot of cases, you know, cards like this sell a ton. And in fact, I've seen raw cards outsell 8s and 9s, just because, again, part of it is people, hey, they think that they might get the 10. So it's that whole hope and a dream. But that's sort of what's the problem is that, you know, PSA and grading in general just suck money out of the hobby. Money that could be used, again, for a lot of other activities other than just, painting cardboard inside plastic. And, you know, there are times when it's important to probably grade cards. And I've said this over and over that if a card is easily counterfeited, if a card has condition issues that, make it, for example, like 71 tops, which are recolored all over the place, right? Something like that, where if you want to say, look, I want to really make sure I get something that's authentic and real and not altered or played with, then grading can really be an important part. Now, they make mistakes too, but in general, it gives you at least a better chance of something being not messed with. And I think that is where, you have to make some, important decisions as you make, as you buy cards as a collector. But in general, there are tons of cards. And again, we may be back into a world where, you have to look at cards. You have to judge for yourself if you want to buy that card in that condition. But blindly just paying more for an 8 or 9 is just not what people are doing today. And I think the only thing it does is maybe gives you some baseline idea of condition, right? And that's important for even for those pre-war cards I talked about, where the condition number doesn't matter. But the thing is like, even those kind of cards where they're going off of eye peel, right? You look at 5 cards. Like I've gone to many shows where I'm looking for 54 Jackie Robins for my collection. So 54 Jackie tops, there could be a 3, a 5, a 7, all on one table. And you look at them, you're like, well, the 5 looks the nicest, of all of them from an eye peel, but it has a little, wax stain on the back, or it has like on the front, hard to see, print line, or it's slightly angle cut. So therefore it took off 1 or 2 grades. That is, a thing you can make at that show because you have a baseline knowledge of what that grade is for some cards. And I think that's important to remember when we talk about, people buying cards just on visual appeal, eye appeal. The grading on some of those cards still matters in the sense that you can kind of know baseline wise if there's a major condition issue with that card. Because let's remember, guys, back in the day, dealers made a lot of money selling collectors cards they called near mint that had major condition issues that were very difficult to find, like back creases on 55 Bowmans, which is a big issue with that set. So again, I do think in some cases, cards like that, having them graded just to give some baseline, but it doesn't mean you're going to pay more because of a number, right? And I think that's what we're seeing. Paying more doesn't really mean you're going to, just because you get an 8 doesn't mean it'll outsell a super nice looking 6 that has huge color and perfect centering, right? That happens all the time. And that's happened today. It's been happening for a little while now. And I think that's the trend we're going to see continuing. But the thing I would say is like, what's really killing me is the amount of new collectors and modern collectors that are coming to this industry thinking that they have to grade everything they have, that the only cards that are worth selling are if they're graded and have some sort of, number on them that they can, do comps and understand like what the value is. If we just got better at just looking at cards and making those condition, especially on newer cards, which again, don't really have huge issues like that for the most part. I just think all that energy and time spent grading and 6 months delayed from the time you ship it to PSA and get the card back, all that stuff could just go away and you could just be more free to buy, sell, collect, trade, whatever you're going to do, not wait and be a slave to the PSA process or the grading process. Now, other companies like SGC, the customer service area is better, but again, with them being purchased by PSA, it's still up in the air as whether or not they're going to survive, let alone be the same company they were, 4 or 5 years ago. So the landscape's changing, sentiments are changing around grading. But again, when you think about it, you know, you could take this pile of cards, right? And if you say, okay, you're going to average, $25, $30 a card, and I have 10 or 15 cards, it's like, well, okay, I could spend $450 getting cards like this graded. If I get an upcharge, I'm going to be spending $600 getting cards like this graded. Or I could just put them in a nice holder, and then take that $600 and buy another card for my collection. Or go to a show, or do something else with that money for my hobby that makes me, enjoy the hobby more. And so, unless you're just chasing that 10, and again, I'm a realist. I know that when it comes time to sell, if I decide I'm out of the hobby and I need to maximize my value, yes, I might try to get 10s on some cards here that I think are super good condition, because that makes you more money. I won't deny 10s sell for more money. But that could erode over time as people just get more and more into just collecting, and maybe the number of grades don't matter as much. I know it's a huge point in the Griffey community. 10s matter to some collectors hugely, some they don't matter at all. But that's the thing, is like, I could spend the $400 to $600 on grading these cards, or just buy and sell more cards, or just do something else hobby wise. And that's sort of where I'm at. I'm just thinking, like, is it worth me getting these cards, prepping them, shipping them, waiting 3 to 6 months to get the cards back, and then be disappointed with half the grades, or just, pop them and rescind them, and do that a couple times, and the frustration with all that to get it, the grade I think the card needs, that all just, wastes energy and wastes time, wastes money, doesn't make your collection better. And that's the point. You don't need grading to enjoy the hobby. You don't need grading to make a great collection. You don't need grading to buy and sell. All those things can be enjoyed without grading. And I think we need to evolve our thinking around it. We, as collectors, we can do this. You don't need this as a crutch. And again, you look in my background here, I got tons of graded cards, but I'm starting to slowly transition to a lot more non-graded cards, and just enjoying the cards as is. And I think, now, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. I'm not telling you how to collect. I'm just saying, as a hobby, I do think the amount of money and effort and time we spend in grading, and the resources spent, is not giving us the return on that investment that did 10 or 15 years ago, or even 20 years ago. And it's time to rethink that process. It's time to rethink how we do the hobby and how we go about. Because to me, again, it's just about the cards and enjoying the hobby and growing the collection, not about the numbers and the plastic and all the things that grading sometimes represents, and a lot of frustration and a lot of question marks and a lot of wasted time is how I see grading right now. So let me know your opinion. Let me know what you think. And let me know if you're starting to slow down on grading, or do you feel like, it's still a huge part of the hobby that you have to compete in or be part of to enjoy the hobby. Because to me, that's my biggest point, is you don't need it to enjoy the hobby or to be a part. So let me know in the comments. I'll see you next time on Cards and Comics. Bye.